Good morning, good morning, good morning, beautiful people. Good afternoon, good evening. No matter what time it is, just know this is the day that the Lord has made, and I will rejoice and be glad in it. As always, God is good, and He is good all the time. Rohel Aguilera Maderas, right? And so I'm pretty much butchering his name. I'm sorry, y'all. But this is the young man who is about 23 years old. And in Colorado, he was convicted of, he had a tractor trailer, truck, 18 wheeler. He was driving and he crashed into these several groups of people. Some people were murdered, some people were injured. And at first, he was convicted to consecutively, it came out to be like 100 years or 110 years in prison, right? And so his case had caused a lot of backlash, right? To where people got involved and was like, he shouldn't be punished like this. This is unfair. You know what I'm saying? And if you think about it, we're gonna get started. Y'all bear with me. I just put some oil in my hair, trying to keep it moisturized, all that itchy going on. But this conversation we're talking about, we have to do it. We got to do it one time. Let me take the glasses off so you don't have that glare. I got the glasses on because they help me, with reading, especially from far away. And I'm going to have to look at my laptop a little bit and read from my laptop. But I want to talk to y'all about the criminal justice system, right? There's some things that people misperceive as legitimate or factual, because I mean, honestly, unless you have interactions with the law like firsthand, through experience, 9 times out of 10, it's not gonna look too well for you. Most people experiences with the criminal justice system is through, watching things like Law and Order, SVU, CSI Miami, and all those other things. And that's what they call the CSI effect, right? Is where people believe that the criminal justice system functions the way that they see it on TV. And to be 100% honest, it's not. It's nothing like that. In fact, majority of these cases don't go to trial. Motherfucker TV has you to believe that a lot of the time these cases are going to trial. No, over 90% of court cases are resolved by plea bargains. Less than 10% of court cases actually goes to trial, right? And then of that 10%, less than 5% of them are actually found guilty, through the use of evidence and all that other stuff on the prosecutor. And so people, their interpretation of the criminal justice system is so flawed because of the fact that, like I said, you don't have access to it in the sense of like the real world, right? You see it more through the lens of entertainment, where, like I said, Law and Order, CSI shows like that, you know what I'm saying? Cops. What's that other show where they have those kids scared straight? You believe that the criminal justice system is like that, and it's not. You know what I'm saying? There's even some people who believe those methods to be a way to deter people from getting into crime, and that's untrue. I mean, you can look at any research that has been done. Research has been done on Scare Straight, and in fact, Scare Straight has pushed more children into criminalization than they have deterring them. You know what I'm saying? Because you got to take into consideration, majority of those who participate in criminal behaviors, they come from broken families, broken backgrounds, whether it's impoverished, lack of education, drug addiction, all types of stuff, abuse. And then you put them into this space, Scared Straight, where they got criminals yelling at them, calling them names. I mean, it ain't much different from the bullying and stuff that they see at home and at school. So they just like, this ain't nothing new. That's how it was when I went into the Marine Corps, right? In boot camp, all that yelling and stuff they did. To some people, that probably was like a culture shock. But to me, I was like, this is right at home. It's unstable, yelling, loud. Nigga calling you names. This feels right at home, you know? And so you take broken people and you put these broken people into these broken spaces and you expect them to get fixed. Nah. And so that's why we have to have this conversation, because a lot of people have their their misconceptions, their misperceptions when it comes to the motherfucking criminal justice system. Now, y'all be patient with me because yes, I got me a blunt. I got my little ashtray over here. So you're going to see me reaching. I also got my oil. I'm moisturizing my hair. For those who, just a little tip for hair, because I see all these people, especially on YouTube, who ain't black, and they getting into hair braiding, and all they do is pat their head. And it's itchy. It's itchy. It's growing. You need some moisture, okay? Your hair is drying out, on top of the fact that it's being pulled to the point where it has to grow. Moisturize that bad boy. I think I put a little too much over on this side. I feel it dripping down my face, but it is what it is. You gotta see me oil my hair throughout and smoke blunt. But we gotta talk about these things because, like I said, people have some misperception because of how TV plays out. Like, have any of y'all heard of Rohel Aguilera Maderas, right? And so I'm pretty much butchering his name. I'm sorry, y'all. But this is the young man who is about 23 years old. And in Colorado, he was convicted of, he had a tractor trailer, truck, 18-wheeler. He was driving and he crashed into these several groups of people. Some people were murdered. Some people were injured. And at first he was convicted to consecutively, it came out to be like 100 years or 110 years in prison, right? And so his case had caused a lot of backlash, right? To where people got involved and was like, he shouldn't be punished like this. This is unfair. You know what I'm saying? And if you think about it, I mean, we have constitutional protections where it talks about, excessive bail and punishment and stuff. And so 100, years for someone, especially with no criminal background, it seems pretty crazy, especially over something that was not intentional. Like, he didn't intend to ram his truck into those people. And a lot of people had their opinions about the situation, right? And so here's the thing. I served in the military and I was a truck driver. And I know for a fact, as military and then I was overseas, if I had gotten to some kind of accident, right? If I had gotten into some kind of accident to where it ended up hurting several natives, right? It would have ended poorly because one, I'm military, and two, look at my skin. Look at my skin. But even we, like, at those times, we're just like, you can't expect someone to know everything. One, this guy was 23 years old. You know what I'm saying? He was just hired onto the job, hasn't even been working there a whole year. And in fact, he hasn't even had his driver's license of, more than, I think it was like 11 months or some trash prior to the accident. Dude, he's a baby, and they expect you to know all these things. And when it comes to a truck, right, you coming down the hill, you're supposed to use what they call your, I think we call it in the military, your Jake brake, but it's literally this button you push and it assists, it grabs onto your brakes and it assists you coming down steep slopes, especially when you have so much weight. But for somebody who is a novice, you know what I'm saying, it's easy to mess up and all this other stuff. But people threw this man under the bus. He was convicted. Then his conviction was overturned. His governor got involved. They was like, his punishment is unfair. We got to fix this. Right. But that's not how cases occur on a regular basis. The average person would have done what he did, been convicted of 100 years, and would have been sitting in prison for 100 years. It's very rare that these cases gain, media attention and civilian attention to where you end up getting help like that, right? But many of us think that this is how it works because of how we see it on TV. Well, this is a popular case that made it on TV. The cases you see on TV, bro, in all reality, that's not how they function in real life. Like, TV cases and what happens in real life is they're two different things, yo. Two different things. And that's the thing that people need to grasp the concept, right? The criminal justice system on average is pretty raggedy. It's pretty raggedy. Majority of the people that's sitting in jail has not been convicted of a crime. They've just been charged. Many of them haven't even seen a judge to rule whether or not their arrest is lawful. They're just sitting in there. And then by the time they do come and see a judge, they done sat there so long, they're like, well, we can't release this person after they done sat in jail days, weeks, months on end. You know what I'm saying? And they've not been convicted of anything. So we have to get a what? A guilty plea. So then that's when they convict you. Well, you should take this guilty plea because if you go to trial, the worst can happen and you could be punished worse. And that people looking at this situation, well, I done sat here this long, you know what I'm saying? I might as well just take it. I get to be freed after this. I'll take it. And that's exactly what happened. I mean, when I did my own, I was attending my own criminal trials. That's exactly what was happening. You have people showing up in motherfucking their little jail uniform. Now, when you get a jail uniform, you've been sitting in jail for a pretty long time. This man, he was literally putting in his plea. This is the first time he had seen the judge, and he's putting in his plea, whether he pleads guilty or not guilty. Now, I know from my own experience, his public defender told him, you should take the plea. It benefits you. It doesn't, but that's what they tell you. And he took the plea because he processed it like, man, I already sat in here for however long. You know what I'm saying? If I try to take this to trial, who knows? They'll probably have me sitting in jail for that entire time. And then when I actually get to the trial, I may even be found guilty. So now there's that risk of prison. So it's just like all this incarceration. Nah. If I plead guilty, I get time served and then get up out of here. That is what it is. And so that's the bulk of the criminal justice system. A lot of the people did not do what they're accused. And it's on the burden of the prosecutor to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you did what they accused you of. But if you think about it, one, just like every other government institution and, us citizens, we outnumber them, right? So think about it. In a city in like where I live, Rochester, New York, right? It's about 210,000 people who live here. Of that 210,000, our court sees about maybe, we'll say on average, 2,000 court cases. If 90% of those 2,000 court cases are resolved by plea bargains, that means about 1,800 of those cases of the 2,000 is just people automatically just taking pleas. That's whether they did it or not. They're just like, I'll take the plea, be done with this, move on about my business. Where the other 10%, less than just about, actually goes to trial. But of that little bit, so we got shy of 200 cases out of 2,000 that goes to trial. Of those 200, less than 5% of them are actually found guilty by the prosecutor, the evidence, and all that jazz. Less than 5%. So we could do the math here. It's 5% of 200, right? 10 people, just about 10 people out of 2,000 are actually found guilty in the court of law through the actual procedures of how court works for a trial. The rest of them, out of that 200, the other almost about 190, usually they're just freed. They're dismissed on something. There's a mistrial. There was some illegal, happened with the police, whether it was they unlawfully detained the person. There was some error in their police report, whether there's prosecutorial, errors, they're thrown out. Out of 2,000 people, about 10 people are actually found guilty. I don't know if you know how to process data, but that tells me I have a greater chance getting my case thrown out than I do anything else. We make their jobs easier. Remind you, we outnumber them. 2,000 cases out of about 210,000 people that live in Rochester, right? But of those 2,000 cases, we barely got like 12 judges that oversees everything, not just criminal. They got to overlook family court. They got to deal with civil court, everything, all the different types of courts, these same few judges deal with them. We got like 10 to 12 of these people. Then when you look at prosecutors, you got a handful of them too. Ain't no more than 12 of them. Then when you look at public defenders, it's a little bit of them too. And on top of the fact that the government funding is vastly different than how private funding works, right? Government funding, there's more, you got to share a little bit more. You got to spread the wealth. You know what I'm saying? You can't exhaust all the monies, there's these municipalities be on budgets and stuff. So at the end of the day, they're underfunded and they're understaffed. You know what I'm saying? And they don't have the means to do anything. Because at the end of the day, you're a prosecutor, right? One prosecutor. It is not uncommon for a prosecutor to have a caseload of like 100 cases just by themselves. So as for me, right, when I went through the system, I had a prosecutor. So it's me and 99 other people that had my prosecutor. So when my prosecutor, or that had my public defender. So when my public defender brings an offer to me, I don't view anything as they say as unbiased, because the way I see it is like, well, me taking a guilty plea benefits you, not me, because one, I would end up with the guilty, verdict on my stuff, and who knows, maybe convicted, whatever the punishment is and all that jazz, where you just get to move on to your next case. And you got to think about it. A lot of times, that's why they tell you should take the plea. It ain't because they don't weigh, your odds and they feel that this is the best option for you. No, it's the best option for them. The quicker you take that plea, the quicker they could check you off as done and they can move on to the next case. That's it. It don't benefit you. It doesn't. Because now you got to deal with the stigma of being convicted. If, say, the police violated your rights and you thought, you was like, well, I'm going to sue the police for violating my rights. Well, not with no conviction, because according to them, it's like you were in the midst of committing a crime when such and such happened. You don't have no legal grounds to do anything. And that's exactly how they do it. Like they won't even, you can get beat the freak up by the police. They won't let you sue them if you get guilty, that guilty charge, that guilty plea. You know what I'm saying? If you get convicted, they just gonna be like, well, you was in the midst of committing a crime. You're on your own, bud. And so you got to take into consideration. It don't benefit you. It doesn't benefit the prosecutor or it doesn't benefit you, but in fact benefits the prosecutor because think about it. These prosecutors, a lot of them have the dream of becoming politicians. But you can't become no politician if you look soft on crime. You know what I'm saying? You can't look soft on crime. So how do they look tough on crime? Well, they have a high conviction rate. If you have a prosecutor with a conviction rate of 97, I mean, they look pretty tough on crime. And then judge, when they get into politics, they can sit here and say, oh, I was tough on crime. And, I didn't play with criminals and blah, 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 blah. And I'm for the people and blah, 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 blah. And people eat that junk up. They eat it up. Eat it up. Overlook at the fact that it's like, yeah, they're not tough on crime. A part of their conviction rates, well, some of that has to do with these pleas. Remember, over 90% of convictions are handled by plea bargains. That means prosecutors nationwide, majority of their wins were given to them based on someone accepting a guilty plea. Now, I remind you, not everybody that takes a guilty plea actually did what they were accused of. A lot of people take these guilty pleas because it seems beneficial to them at the moment, right? For me, with my case, I've been dealing with my junk for 17 months. It just ended 2 days ago. 17 months, almost 2 years. Yet I have the right to a speedy trial. Well, it took almost 2 years before I actually got a trial. Almost 2 years. Then they hit me with an ultimatum. They said, because they got rid of one charge, mistrial, and then they wanted to start up a whole new trial for the second charge, which is obstructing government administration. Now, The police couldn't charge me with resisting arrest because I'm on the body worn camera asking them, am I under arrest? And they said no. So what they did was hit me with obstructing government administration. And so they hit me with this ultimatum. After the mistrial, they said, come back next week. So here it is, April 12th, I came to them. And they're like, well, take an ACD. So I think it's adjourned conditional dismissal. Take an ACD. It completely dismisses, falls apart after 6 months of no interaction with the law. And I'm like, well, I want to take it to trial so that way once the trial is over, I'm done with this. They hit me with an ultimatum. Well, it's either take the ACD or you can go to trial, but your trial won't be scheduled out for another 8 months to a year. Mind you, we're already 17 months in. But I have the right to a speedy trial. Okay. You see what I'm saying? This is the weird stuff that happens behind the scenes within the criminal justice system that many people just do not know about. Because unless you're in the system and it's happening to you or somebody that's really close to you and you're, watching firsthand for yourself, like how my family became aware of how raggedy the criminal justice system is by being aware of what was happening with my situation, you're not going to know this information, Like I said, prosecutors depend on these plea bargains. So when you take a guilty plea, you accept the plea, it's not benefiting you. It's benefiting everybody but you. Everybody but you. It's benefiting your public defender because at the end of the day, your public defender, they just want you off of their motherfucking caseload so they can move on to the next caseload because they exhausted and they feel that they don't get paid enough. They don't get paid enough. It benefits the judge because they get to take your case off the docket, move on to the next one. And it benefits the prosecutor because it's a win for them. And then they get to move on to the next one. Because at the end of the day, their caseload, they're not equipped to handle their caseloads. I mean, think about it. If the roles were to flip, right? Instead of 90% of people accepting plea bargains, if 90% of those people nationwide were to go and take their junk, push for trial, right? A lot of the court systems, for what we know, will fall apart literally. It will just crumble because they're not equipped to handle it. Because now they say you have the right to speedy trial. With the way that it worked out, look how it happened with me. Here it is. We 17 months in, just now getting a trial. But imagine if everybody was to take their junk to trial. Man, you won't see a trial for 5+ years. It'll fall apart. The criminal justice system would, for what we know, will fall apart if people stop taking guilty pleas and start pushing their junk to trial. But they benefit on this. Everybody and their mama benefit from this, except you. Prosecutor looks motherfucking tough on crime with a high conviction rate, which is predominantly acquired by plea bargains. Your public defender, they get to move on to their next, because a lot of them is just tasked out as public defenders for 3 years or so. After 3 years, a lot of them move on. They either go into being prosecutors or they go into private firms, because being a public defender is like a stepping stone for people. They start off there just to gain a little experience. And then after that, they start hopping around to, areas that suit them more. People don't become lawyers on average because they want to be a public defender. Public defenders, people will tell you they get the short end of the stick. Yes, because like I said, they're overworked, they're by themselves. They don't have all that help. And on top of the fact, they're poorly paid. They're poorly compensated for their work. But at the same time, a lot of them be doing some raggedy stuff, because the public defenders that I had, them niggas were raggedy. I straight up had this public defender that told me, well, if you're convicted, you can always appeal for, ineffective counsel. She didn't give a damn about the outcome. She was just like, whatever happens, happens. At this point, you just wasting my time, because I don't want to deal with your case anyways. It's not even that serious. Because one, I had a misdemeanor. Many people say, well, it's not often that misdemeanors go to trial. It's not often that many cases go to trial. Think about it. These are the raggedy systems. It benefits everybody in that court but you. You have to deal with the stigma of being convicted. You know, if you're convicted of a drug offense, you lose access to government assistance. You know, you lose your job. If you got a car that you're paying a car note on, if you sitting in jail or prison, you know, for all this time, even if it's you not even convicted, you just sitting in there awaiting your trial because you just so happen to have a criminal record. And that's one of the things that they look at, mitigating and aggravating circumstances, right? And one of them aggravated circumstances, well, does this person have a criminal record? Yes, this person has a criminal record. You could have not done what you're accused, but because you have a criminal record, they're like, I don't view you as credible to to release you on your own recognizance. So we're going to hold you in jail. And or that you just got people who's sitting in jail who's just never been brought before a judge, literally, because there's no checks and balances. The police are the gatekeepers to the prison system. They allow people in, but there's rarely any checks and balances to ensure that the people they're bringing in should be there in the first place. If there's some legitimacy to, their arrests. A lot of the people that's sitting in jail has not seen a judge nor been convicted. And a lot of the people that's sitting in these jails, they're charged with nonviolent offenses. You could look at the data in your municipality. You'll see. This tough on crime claim came about the late 80s because most people don't even realize, but we have furlough programs that was very prevalent around, the late 70s going into the 80s. About the 80s is when it started to stop because that's when, being tough on crime, even for Democrats, became a thing. See, Democrats were more lenient during this time where they were more, for furlough programs. So that means that instead of you spending your entire sentencing incarcerated, you could have been released home for holidays or weekends, stuff like that, to spend time with your family. And, but then there was this switch. So if any of y'all, I want to show y'all the case of Willie Horton. Now, Willie Horton became the face of, tough on crime. And then there's this weird thing that started to happen with the ads too. So Willie Horton is this black man who was convicted of a crime, several crimes in the 80s, right? And he was released on furlough. And while on furlough, he committed, I believe it was, so Willie Horton, he was serving a life sentence for murder. And he was a part of the furlough program. And while on the furlough program, he basically was released from prison for the weekends. And while he was on the furlough program, he ended up committing assault, robbery, and rape. So politicians, preferably Republicans, because at this time, DUKAKIS, right? He was looking very prominent with the presidential election in the 80s at this time. And Republicans used Willie Horton as this scapegoat, but also this like weird advertisement where they was like, look at this, this criminalistic man. Here it is, a criminal. And the Democrats are so lenient and so nice that they let him, they released him to go home on the weekends on the furlough program. And while on this furlough program, he ended up assaulting, raping, and robbing, and this is the behavior that we are just against, So here go the Republicans asserting their tough on crime stance, right? And then they started to show this ad. And I'm going to show y'all the motherfucking ad. Hold on.
Despite a life sentence, Horton received 10 weekend passes from prison.
It's like a baseball player. A lot of times you're going to do an ad and you strike out. Nobody even cares about it. It's rare that you have one where you swing and you hit and you just watch it sail.
My assistant called me up and said they caught Willie Horton. And I said, well, what do you mean they caught him? He's been in prison for life. Why are murderers being let out into the streets? We learned fairly quickly that he was out on a weekend pass, a furlough they called it, and he invaded a couple's house in Maryland, brutalized the man and raped the woman.
DUKAKIS believed the furlough policy would encourage better behavior in prison by lifers. They need some kind of incentive, or there will be, chaos inside. It was a big story in the local papers. So the minute we had the nomination, we knew we were going to face Willie Horton.
Bush and DUKAKIS on crime. Bush supports the death penalty for first-degree murderers. DUKAKIS not only opposes the death penalty, he allowed first-degree murderers to have weekend passes from prison. One was Willie Horton.
I ran an independent expenditure, which is an outside organization that isn't involved with the actual campaign. We were scared. Governor DUKAKIS, who was running rather large leads in the polls, was going to sweep to victory. So it called for some dramatic campaign action.
Despite a life sentence, Horton received 10 weekend passes from prison. Horton fled, kidnapped a young couple, stabbing the man and repeatedly raping his girlfriend.
The impact and the effect, I believe, had a great deal to do with Willie Horton's race.
Horton was an ugly guy, and he looked like everybody's stereotype of a black thug. I can't believe when they made those ads, they didn't know what they were doing, raising racial fears.
Willie Horton was a hardened criminal. People are rightly scared. It doesn't matter if he's black or white or yellow or purple.
But what?
When they start that bringing in colors of people that no one is, yellow and purple, I mean, what's next? Orange? There's no color people. When they start saying stuff like that, there's truth to it. Race is the issue, because why would you bring in these races of people that don't exist, like yellow and purple?
What ultimately killed DUKAKIS was not the Willie Horton ad. It was the Poly Pavilion answer.
Governor, if Kitty DUKAKIS were raped and murdered, would you favor an irrevocable death penalty for the killer?
That was as close as we were going to ever get to the Willie Horton question. We must have done the answer 1,000 times. I know what it's like to be the victim of crime. I'm on the side of victims.
No, I don't, Bernard, and I think you know that I've opposed the death penalty during all of my life. I don't see any evidence that it's a deterrent. And
it came right across the plate, and he didn't see it. It was very clear after that first question we were going to go into free fall.
It was probably the first of the great independent expenditures. We didn't have any involvement with the Bush campaign. We had a commonality of interest to continue the Reagan Revolution, and the ad impacted public policy. All across the country, I'll always be glad I did it.
That campaign made clear that the best way to destroy someone was to find an outside group to do the kind of ad that the candidate himself can't do because he'll get killed for doing it, such as Swift boat veterans, for instance.
When the chips were down, you could not count on John Kerry.
John Kerry is no war hero.
Now it's become just a usual tactic. In the wake of that race, every Democratic politician I knew was tripping over themselves to vote for 3 strikes laws, mandatory sentencing, anything they could vote for to prove they were tough on crime. What Willie Horton did was create a generation of legislators who voted for everything. And the result was crowded prisons, suspicion in the minority community, tensions that continue to this day.
In a way, I tie this to the state of America today. This was somehow when we started beating the heck out of each other for totally political purposes. This ad, I think, hit at the inner fears of people, and it's just escalated over the last, 28 years?
Now I'm going to show you the actual ad, because what had happened was he strategically darkened Willie Horton's face in this ad to make him look more criminalistic by tailoring to white people's fears of black people. Where you think of black, you associate it with demons and darkness and evil. Let's see it. Let's see it.
Bush and Dukakis on crime.
This ad, made by George H.W. Bush's supporters for his 1988 presidential campaign, is infamous for stoking racial fears in an attack against his Democratic opponent, Michael Dukakis.
He allowed first-degree murderers to have weekend passes from prison. One was Willie Horton, who murdered a boy in a robbery, stabbing him 19 times. Horton fled, kidnapped a young couple, stabbing the man and repeatedly raping his girlfriend. Weekend prison passes. Dukakis on crime.
The 30-second ad was aimed at painting Dukakis as weak on crime, and it used photos of Horton in a way that played into racist stereotypes linking crime and black men. Critics say it encouraged race-based politics.
The insinuation is, if you elect Governor Dukakis as president, we're going to have black rapists running amok in the country, right? So it's playing to white fears about black crime.
The Bush campaign denied any involvement in the ad, but later aired a related one.
His revolving door prison policy gave weekend furloughs to first-degree murderers not eligible for parole.
This ad directly attacked furlough programs, a common practice at the time where inmates were allowed out of prison to visit family. It was the same program that gave Horton his so-called weekend pass. The effects of this political tactic by the Bush campaign lived on for years to come. When Bill Clinton took office, he took a similar tough-on-crime approach.
The message today to the Bloods, the Crips, to every criminal gang preying on the innocent is clear. We mean to put you out of business.
The Horton ad also gave way to racially charged politics that we continue to see today. A week before the 2018 midterm elections, President Trump's team released this ad, falsely connecting crime to Mexican immigrants. Years later, the legacy of the Horton ad lives on.
So I just wanted to show you that so you can see politics is race bait, and it's something that still happens today. And politics isn't the only one, because people always want to bring up how we got the three governing branches, right? The checks and balance. We got the executive, the legislative, and the judicial, right? And the executive branch is, for simplicity, the president and such like that, governors and all that wonderful jazz. And then you have the mayors. And then the legislative side, you have Congress. And then judicial, you have the courts, the judges, right? And the crazy part is, research has even shown that racial bias exists even in the court systems, right? Where they literally tested judges amongst different parts of the world, or not the world, but the US, where you had East Coast, West Coast, some Central, and mostly, city, but judges, if you were to see these certain scenarios, and the scenarios would be set up where you have a black perpetrator and a white perpetrator, who would be, viewed as more criminalistic? And after these, they ran these series of tests on these judges, it came out to be, and it did not matter about the diversity of the judges, right? So that means white compared to black. On average, it didn't matter if you had white judges, black judges, Latino judges. Racial bias exists amongst judges, and it was a very large percentage. Yes, the percentage was larger for white people. To be fair, the percentage of white people in the U.S. is larger, you know what I'm saying? So it would make sense that they would have a greater amount of those who show racial bias. But even when testing racial minority judges, they still show racial bias, even amongst their own race. Now, there's many, theories as to why that is, and some of it had to deal with the fact that you had these racial minority judges that did not want to seem lenient on their own type of people, in comparison to their whiter counterpart. So their views tend to align to them. Then there's the whole where class still exists, classism, right? And even though wealthy, which in this sense judges like the judge who oversee my case, we share in the sense that we're both black. However, that's probably the only similarity that that person could view in his head. The same with me. I don't really see much similarity outside the fact that we're black, because the views that I feel that I experienced that was negative, that judges held by the white ones, was same negative views held by the black ones. Research has proved that racial bias exists even amongst judges. So when these people make their, they have their decision making that revolves around people's lives, whether regarding incarceration and stuff, they're not separating themselves from their ideologies. And it's crazy that we even think that people are out here like, okay, I'm supposed to be unbiased and impartial, so I'm going to step outside of my ideologies. I'm going to set these aside. And, my perspective towards gays and women and poor and trans and sex workers and farmers and construction workers and homeless and people living paycheck to paycheck, I'm going to set these thoughts aside and just judge them on this blank slate of what? There's nothing to even base it on, because it's not there. Because we haven't been programmed, or we haven't been taught through this sense of outside of our idea. Everything that we do, our decision making, the way we speak, who we choose to link up with, whether it's intimately, through sex, or even friendships, it's based on how we feel on the inside, our ideologies. If you hold negative views towards white people, 9 times out of 10, you ain't gonna have no white friends. You ain't letting no white people up in your house. And that's the same goes if you have negative views towards Black or Latino or Native Americans. If you view them as someone that is just as entertainment and nothing else outside of that, you're not about to separate yourself from that. That's you. And people who think that they can separate themselves, you're crazy. You're freaking crazy. Because as long as you're a human with life in your body, breath in your body, you're flawed. You're fallible. And the way you view life is like the Bible says. We look on the outside appearance. Our judgment is so poor because we lean to our own understanding, which our own understandings are shaped around ourselves. We don't love other people as we love ourselves. Hell, there's a lot of us that don't even love ourselves. And we expect you to hold fair judgment against someone else that you do not love and you do not know? Like, no. Rohel, however you pronounce his name, he was viewed negatively because he was an immigrant who came here seeking a better life. People were saying deport him which is legally something that is allowed right now, where if immigrants are convicted, not even convicted, if they're charged with just misdemeanors, right? And then they're convicted, but they could be deported over something as simple as a misdemeanor. And people think, well, misdemeanor is pretty high, but anything can become a misdemeanor by the stroke of a pen, the type of a button. Once upon a time, alcohol was prohibited. How many of y'all would take light if they all of a sudden decided to prohibit alcohol again? Several of y'all will be sent in jails and prisons that do not view yourselves as criminals. There's several of y'all who have committed crimes. Drinking and driving in certain states is a misdemeanor, and in some states a felony. Just depends on what municipality you're under. Some of y'all got away with it. Some of y'all had done some foul stuff. You done hit somebody, got in a bar fight, shoved somebody, called somebody words that are fighting words, legally deemed, explained, defined fighting words. Y'all, we equally have done some foul stuff out here, you know what I'm saying? At the end of the day, If you don't view yourself as a criminal with all the foul stuff that you know you've done, how can you pass unfair judgment against somebody else? Me personally, I feel humans are incapable of punishing anybody. I do believe that our punishment laws should be made more lenient. Yes, that would mean that even someone who was convicted of murdering someone will be let out earlier. At the end of the day, we don't know nothing 100%. Like the Bible says, as humans, we don't know another human's heart. We don't know another man's heart. So even someone who could have potentially been one way all their life, they could wake up literally one day and be completely different. Because I truly believe that any man who calls in the name of the Lord, he shall be saved. Any man that calls on Jesus, who gives his life to Jesus, you could become a new person, because the Bible says it, that in Jesus we are created into new creatures. We are no longer of this world. We become just these basically entities that's just living here, but we're not of it. We become created new in Christ. So I do believe that people can change. We're not, as humans, we are not capable of seeking whether or not a person changed. The only way we can know that they do not do it is if they act upon it, which takes away from being proactive, and then it becomes a more reactive approach. But at the end of the day, a lot of what we do out here is reactive. I mean, look at the police. So why not be reactive in these senses? We can't punish people on the presumption that they're going to do something. We're not God. We don't know whether or not, because you could think it and not do it. Several people have said that they will kill somebody, threaten to kill somebody, thought of killing somebody, and have not acted upon it. Many of us have thought, said, threatened in some form of harming someone else, because the Bible says when you get angry, please don't sin. Do not sin. Because getting angry is getting angry, and then you react in such a way that is harmful, not only to yourself, but to others. We have to be the ones that say, hey, I want different. I want change. I want something else. Because the way I'm carrying out, this ain't it. We have to want that. But at the end of the day, going back to what I was talking about in the beginning, the systems are crooked. Racial bias exists, and not just racial bias, but bias in general, because there are some poor white people who go through things just on the strength of not having money. They are affected negatively in their ways. You know, we tend to, when it comes to how we feel our pain and traumas and oppression is, we like to play this crab in the bucket mentality where it's like my struggle was worse than yours. And it's just like, bro, you don't know that, because at the end of the day, according to man's knowledge, which is man's science, right? If we was to use our science, we can't compare to see whose struggle was worse and better. We can't. There's no way to. All I know is my experience, and I know it was terrible for me. The only thing I can do as a human is show empathy and realize that what you tell me your experience is, it's bad. And realize, well, dang, that is bad. Because, I mean, not looking at it from my perspective, as in like, well, if I was in that, would that have? No, because me existing in that time, at that moment, the reactions wouldn't have been the same. We're just incapable of pinpointing all the specifics like that. So that's why, me personally, I just feel like 10 years should be a cutoff for everything and anybody. I don't care if it's rape, murder. 10 years should be cut off. Like after 10 years, release back into society, and you should not be hindered in the sense, well, you did this terrible thing, so you should punish for this until to the day you die. I mean, rich people are taken care of all the time. And you think these people are wonderful people? No, they're terrible. Terrible. Because imagine, many of us have not. And we are losing it, going ape mess, you know. Imagine still going through what we go through as poor people, you know. sicknesses and illness and pains and incapabilities of producing children and, loss and all this other. Imagine going through all that and have money. Because now you're just trying to buy your way through. And superficially, that may seem like it's nice, it works. But at the end of the day, you can't take it with you. So what's the purpose, You can't take it with you. So what's the purpose? We see it all the time. Rich people killing themselves, committing suicide. Life can't be that grand when you got rich people killing themselves. You know what I'm saying? Because at the end of the day, stress don't go nowhere. Everybody go through stresses. It's just, it don't look the same for everybody because all our experiences are not the same. How we process information is not the same. You know what I'm saying? So how you react to something ain't gonna be the same. Because at the end of the day, we are not the same in that sense. We are the same as that we're human. We go through, whatever that looks like for you. We all do it. We go through. But to think that your situation is worse than the next. And I was one of those people. I used to think like, man, ain't nobody struggle as hard as the black struggle. Especially as a black woman. When black dudes start talking, I'd be like, bro, I know y'all go through, but imagine having a uterus. I be wanting to tell them in a heartbeat because it's like, if I had a penis, I know things would be a lot smoother for me in certain areas, but then there are certain areas where I know even I have benefits as a female that males do not have. Even though it's just, to me, it seems so bleak because it's very rare that benefits for me, but it still exists. It still exists. The people, when it comes to the criminal justice system, you cannot view things as 100% accurate because these trials, they're not even based on like legit evidence. They're based on who has the more convincing and believable narrative. Half the time, they don't even be having no evidence. They be putting stuff together based on hearsay, word of mouth, witnesses. Do you know how many people sitting in prison and jail? Mostly prison. Just those who were convicted. They weren't convicted of like, DNA evidence saying, yes, you were here and you did this, that, and the third. No. They're sitting in there because somebody said. And then there's ample amount of research out here that proves that witness statements, testimonies, and such are they're motherfucking inaccurate. They shouldn't even be used as primary tools, you know what I'm saying, when it comes to convicting people, because people's memories, you can plant memories into people's minds and thoughts, all types of stuff. People remember stuff faulty. And then you got to think about the time. 17 months it took for me for my trial to actually come about. How accurate do you expect somebody's testimony to be after almost 2 years? I mean, seriously. Seriously. Half the time I could barely remember if I brushed my teeth, in the morning or something like that. You could barely remember what you ate. And I'm supposed to think that you remember something that's incriminating to put somebody away in, incarceration for any amount of time? I don't care if it was 2 days. Shouldn't nobody be sitting there nowhere for nobody's word. And you can't base it on just one. Like, stuff can be coerced. That's the crazy part about it. Stuff can be coerced. Even like personal statements and stuff, it could be coerced, because when you look at how the system actually works, it's very raggedy. You got to sit in on these court cases if you can, because I know some of them, like the ones here in Rochester, they acting trying to keep you out of them, even though it's open to the public. But we're supposed to have access to this stuff because we're supposed to govern one another as brothers and sisters, because the Second Amendment refers to us It don't refers to the government. Military refers to us people sitting at our home, developing a militia amongst ourselves. You see what I'm saying? Don't let these people fool you. You are intelligent enough to govern yourself and to look after yourself. But I want to tell you that statistically, data says that a white man with a criminal record is more likely to be hired for a job over a black man with no criminal record. Let that sink in. And if that applies to scrotum carriers, imagine what the statistics look like when you add in female. You see what I'm saying? Because people love to talk about how these outside people, like in India, they have the caste systems and all this. We got caste systems right here in Rochester, right here in New York, right here in the United States of America. Y'all too busy looking up all the people in other yards. What's in our own backyard, man? It's freaking psychos here. And they're supposed to govern us. There's no governance, because at the end of the day, the checks and balances is a facade, right? You got judges who are protected by absolute immunity. But not only judges, legislative bodies, Congress, protected by absolute immunity, which means that while they are in their acting positions, any decision they make, even no matter how hurtful, harmful, detrimental, even cause of death it is, you can't sue these people. They can't be held civilly liable because absolute immunity provides them protection to supposedly do their jobs efficiently without the fear of civil suits, which is crazy because you can sue someone in medicine for malpractice, but you can't sue a judge or a Congress member. And they make decisions all the time that negatively affect people. I mean, look at the immigrants that are in these concentration camps, in cages, separating families, people dying at the borders, in these holding facilities, being treated inhumanely, not given proper hygiene, even in the midst of a pandemic. We too busy looking at apartheid in other countries when we got that junk right here in America. This entire country is racially divided. Even here in New York, ain't much different. And it ain't different even when you look in the city, because people hide behind many faces. There's people out here that are racist to people and they just living amongst you. You know what I'm saying? And they treat people terribly, but you wouldn't know that because you may not have their same experience, or you may not be in that, to see it. But it exists. Stuff is happening all the time. People with dark skin, Afrocentric features are more likely to be arrested, charged, convicted, and punished more harshly than those with white skin and European-centric features. Nationwide, global. These things ain't no joke, man. These things ain't no joke, man. This stuff is real. It happens to people all the time. This country is divided by race lines. It's divided by motherfucking money. It's divided by education. It's divided by gender. It's divided by your mind. I mean, people could sit here and talk about gender dysphoria. Okay, well, what about racial dysphoria? You really got people out here who's convinced that they're racist, that they're not. What about heterosexuality when that was deemed in the DSM as a mental illness? Because during the Victorian era, sex that was outside of procreating, making children, was viewed as taboo, gross, sinful, mentally ill. You had to be a motherfucking psycho to be out here having sex for pleasure. People sit here and pass judgment. Nothing new under the sun. People been doing the same stuff over and over and over and over. These same powers the powers on this earth has been in their places of power for a while. And the only thing that could come against strongholds like that is Jesus.